So here I want to present a few verses against a literal preexistence. At the top there you see Genesis 3:15, famous prophecy, the proto-evangelion, the gospel before the gospel, if you will. The first mention of the good news, God would raise up the seed of the woman. Similarly, you have another prophecy told to Moses in Deuteronomy 18:18 that God would raise up a prophet from out of or among the Israelites. You have the prophecy in Isaiah 11, verse 1 and 10, where this figure is called the root or the shoot out of Jesse. And then you have in the New Testament, Paul saying in Romans 1, verse 3, Son, Jesus, came into being or comes into being as that seed or descendant of David, whose father was Jesse, as we know. And this is also a reference to perhaps 2 Samuel 7:12 and Paul 2 Timothy 2:8. He's also said to come into existence out of Mary, according to Paul in Galatians 4:4. As a result, Matthew 1:1 and Matthew 1:18 describe the origin of Messiah, Jesus. And then later in Matthew 1, it talks about how he was procreated by God in the womb of Mary, Matthew 1:16 and 1:20. We have in the Old Testament, Psalm 2, verse 7, he's procreated or begotten in a specific day. Most translations have Psalm 2:7 reading, Today I have begotten you. The word begotten is modern day. I would use the word procreated as used in relation to humans coming into being in the womb of their mother. And that's repeated in Hebrews 1:5. Hebrews 2:17 says that he's made like humans in every way. 1 Peter 1:20, he's foreknown before the foundation of the world. Hebrews 5:1, he was made high priest from among humans. And Paul calls him the last Adam who became a life-giving spirit. 1 Corinthians 15:45. And then he's called the firstborn of every creature in Colossians 1, verse 15. So now here are some questions to ask. Where is there any hint of incarnation in Luke chapter 1 or Matthew 1? In other words, what words can they point to show that Luke and Matthew are actually talking about a pre-existent being? Again, whether it's Michael the Archangel or a so-called spirit being, or even if you're dealing with Trinitarians, because obviously hold to a pre-existence. Where's that in the narratives? Another question, how can God be procreated, that is begotten, and then born from a woman? And more than that, actually come out of a woman. What person did Mary actually conceive and give birth to? If Jesus existed as a non-human spirit being, wouldn't that make him some kind of transhuman? So we talk about transgender today, unfortunately. If you're born a female and you think you're a man, you're called a trans man. So wouldn't that mean a transhuman in that context? And then this question is more towards, I guess, Trinitarians. How is Jesus 100% God, 100% man at the same time? So this is in relation to the so-called hypostatic union or the double nature, a doctrine or teaching that was created in the Council of Chalcedon or Chalcedon in 451 AD, if you'd like to Google that. And please read the the creed that came out of the Council of 451 AD. Other question, is Jesus a human person? Are all theophanies, that is, manifestations or appearances of God, Yahweh, Jehovah, the Father, are they actually Christophanies? That is, appearances by the pre-existent Messiah, the Son of God. And why does Hebrews 1, verses 1 and 2 say the Son was not seen nor heard from in the Old Testament? What did he actually empty himself of, according to Paul in Philippians 2, verse 6? And back to Psalm 2:7, what day is this referring to? So when was Jesus begotten, that is procreated? What day specifically? The question at the top, just to go back to, is Jesus a human person? The problem with incarnation, among many other problems, this was seen by the so-called early church councils of what becomes the Catholic and later Protestant system, the problem they encountered was to explain then how many persons is or was Jesus then? So if he pre-exists literally as some kind of person, again, whether you believe he's God the Son or a spirit being, but that's a person, that is an individual, a single self. And then we have the New Testament giving us the human person we know as Jesus. So they obviously said to one another back in the day, that sounds like two persons. And many Christians believed that. This is known in the history of the councils and the creeds as Nestorianism, the belief that there were actually one divine human person and one human person, two separate persons. So they had a bunch of councils. By the way, there were more than 200 councils, early church councils. So what I mean by councils is you've heard of the Council of Nicaea, for example, in 25 AD. So there were hundreds of these things because they kept going back and forth. You had a problem there of two persons. So how do we deal with that? And that's where you get to Chalcedon in 451 AD. Supposedly, this problem of two persons was dealt with by saying, you know what, we'll just say he had two natures, not two persons. So he's one single person, what becomes later known as God the Son in Trinitarian world. And this one person had two natures. And that's how they think they dealt with the issue, but far from it. Some other questions here. Do you hold to eternal generation? So there are many, especially Trinitarians, who interpret Psalm 2:7 as, yes, it was a begetting or a procreation, but not in a literal sense. And this happened in eternity past. In other words, before the world was made, God the Son was eternally generated. And this comes from a so-called church father known as Origen, or Origin, as some pronounce him. And again, you can Google these things. Another question, how do you translate John 1:1 if the Word means the Son? So if you remember John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, as most translate there, the Greek. So if the Word is already the literal pre-existent person, how do you translate that? How do you understand that? Similarly, what does the word became mean in John 1:14? So the word became flesh, okay? The word is already a pre-existing person that becomes, or who becomes, I should say, another person, a human person. Another question, did a spirit being person become another person, a human being? So that's related to John 1:14. How does the affirmation hypostatic union or the double nature of Messiah, these theories that developed, explain verses like Hebrews 13, verse 8? Now, as you know, Hebrews 13:8 says that the Messiah Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and always, or forever. If he added on or assumed human nature, as Trinitarian world teaches, why does Hebrews 13 say what it says, that he does not change? He's the same yesterday, today, forever. Was Jesus another God then? Are we talking about another Yahweh or Jehovah, as many Trinitarians nowadays like to argue that Jesus is not just God, capital G, but actually he's Yahweh, he's Jehovah. So is that another God? Is that another Yahweh? If you'd like to check out some of our articles, go to the humanjesus.org website. Just type in the search box there, Preexistence. Many articles we've posted over the years. This one in particular from Anthony, why preexistence does matter. So you might be thinking, well, does this really matter? Why are you people focused on this? Well, I think it matters. I mean, it mattered to Jesus, right? Matthew 16:16. He was interested to know from his own apostles, his closest people, who do people say I am? So you should care about that question. Who actually is Jesus? Where did he actually come from? I compiled this interesting list. I call it pre-human pre-existence corruptions. So what do I mean by that? Well, let me give you a quick example here. So in Genesis 1:1, as early as the 2nd century AD, Irenaeus, who was one of those so-called church fathers, a bishop in modern day Turkey. So these people left us commentaries, their own musings and writings and interpretations. And he wrote that the text of Genesis 1:1 actually read the sun in the beginning. God established then the heaven and the earth. And that's found in Irenaeus on the Apostolic Preaching, chapter 43. So Irenaeus was mistranslating Genesis 1:1, perhaps from a corrupt Hebrew text at the time. Another example, Matthew 1, verse 18. Some New Testament copies, that verse appears, changed the Greek word Genesis with one N, as you can see, as in the book of Genesis, which means the word Genesis simply means origin or the beginning of, to another Greek word with a double N, also pronounced Genesis, which means birth, not origin, technically speaking. So so that is a pre-human, pre-existence corruption text.